Hello, my name is Carrie Wilkinson, and along with Zach Nicholson, we are the co-conveners for the Illawarra branch of Renew. And we are very lucky to have with us tonight Sophie Hutchinson as our speaker. And we're also very glad that all of you watching could be joining us this evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are watching from. So we have Sophie's webinar, Exploring a Regenerative Pathway to Planetary and Human Health. So Zach and I are talking to you from our living room in Wollongong, which is on Dharawal country. And on behalf of the Renew Illawarra Committee, we would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this meeting on the unceded ancestral lands of the Dharawal, Wadi Wadi and Yuin people. We acknowledge and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to country itself. Now we understand that many of you will be watching from not just the Wollongong and Illawarra area, but from your homes around Australia and indeed possibly the world. So we would also like to extend our respects to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations persons who are watching today and acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and the world and their continuing connection to land, sea, culture and community. I'm going to hand over to Zach now to introduce our speaker, Sophie.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carrie. So today we have Sophie Hutchinson, and Sophie's Director of ADP Consulting and leads an incredibly awesome ESD team, looking at designing designing for sustainability in the built environment. So Sophie is, she has an incredible number of accreditations under her belt, and it would take me a presentation in itself to go through them all. But just briefly, she's regenerative practitioner. She's a WELL and Green Star accredited professional as well. She's also a LEED and BREEAM certified consultant. So she is the one to go to for everything in regards to sustainability and the built environment. And so we're absolutely honoured to have her presenting to us today. And so with that, I'm going to keep her intro incredibly short because she's got a lot that she wants to tell us. So thank you, Sophie, and over way to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zach, for that introduction, and also thank you so much as well to the Renew Network for having me here tonight. It's an absolute privilege. So I'll be talking to you tonight about exploring a regenerative pathway to human and planetary health. This is by no means a small topic. In fact, it's quite huge. And so what my intention is for this evening is to really just give you a broad introduction of regeneration and regenerative design, and really how we really need that if we want to continue to thrive as humans on this planet. So these are the things that I will be talking to you about today. So I will be giving you my own acknowledgement of country, as also in the context of the time in which we meet. I'm going to talk you through a concept of regenerative design. I'm going to talk you through some of the tools that we can use that promote regenerative design to give us both human and planetary health. But most importantly, I'm also going to say that there's regenerative practices for everybody as well. It's not just tools for the built environment that I want to touch upon. And also, I'd like to talk you through a case study of something that I'm working on at the moment. So I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm calling you from the Wurundjeri land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I've shown this image here, which I love, which I came across in my research. This is the Wurundjeri people on the banks of the Merry Creek, which is actually land that's not far from me at all. I spend a lot of time and a lot of solace in this kind of land that's not totally dissimilar to that. So I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people for their connection, their deep connection and spiritual connection to the land and water, and also their rich contribution to society. Now, I also acknowledge the context in which we meet. So we meet in a time of unprecedented human impact. The world has been in existence for 8 billion years. Life on Earth has been in existence for 4.54 billion of that. But human destruction, in a way that we've seen, has occurred since the agricultural and industrial revolutions, so over the last 150 years at tops. So as humans, we account for 0.01% of all life on Earth. but have destroyed 83% of wild mammals and half of the species on the planet to date, which is a bit of a depressing set of statistics. And actually, to go further with this slightly depressing statistics, I also acknowledge that the context that we're meeting also has global and local crises that exist within both our spheres of life. So ecological, health, social, and economic. And just to talk you through those on a macro level, we're now in a term, in a time called the Anthropocene, which represents the beginning of a very rapid human-driven trajectory of our impact on Earth. So we've come out of, it's pushed us naturally out of the glacial and interglacial limit cycle, of which we would naturally kind of maintain a certain temperature, but due to our anthropogenic impact on the Earth, we've now potentially, and our human emissions are pushing towards a planetary threshold where we could very easily push ourselves into a hothouse Earth. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it is extremely likely that human influence was the dominant cause of warming over this period of time between 1950 and 2010. As you can see on the right-hand side, you can see a large increase in observed temperature, of which a very small proportion of that is likely to be natural and naturally influenced. So that ecological crisis has led to us here as a local climate crisis. On a local level, this has played out with changing bioclimatic conditions here in Australia. We've had devastating fires, we've had floods, we've had extreme weather events. The science on the predicted effects of climate change has been around for many years, but actually recent reports have been able to connect that observed risk that we've been likely to see. For example, a report on the 2019 to 2020 bushfires has been able to connect our increased risk of bushfire by at least 30% has been due to climate change. So what we've seen as a result of that is that we have actually acknowledged that we live in a time of a climate emergency, and many jurisdictions have moved to declare that, and in doing so, to declare a climate emergency, a body admits that global warming really and truly does exist, and that measures taken up until this point just are not enough to limit the likely effects caused by climate change. Climate emergencies have been declared by 1,731 jurisdictions and currently cover 820 million citizens. So I think there's awareness that's out there, which is very good to see. And here locally, we can see that covered by the work of the built environment, namely the Australian Architects Declare movement and the Australian Engineers Declare movement, and most recently, even the Builders Declare movement, which is so hot off the press that I didn't even have an image to put to it. But it's good to see that the built environment is moving to recognise this. Obviously, we're in a middle of a global health pandemic, which has obviously sprung on a number of unforeseen difficulties in a number of different ways, which have really highlighted, a lack of resiliency within our system. So one example of which is that COVID-19 has really highlighted some inaccuracies of our system. Well, it's been seen that Black people are within 2 to 4 times more likely to die from COVID, which has in turn caused a huge amount of unrest and recognition, in fact, of these inadequacies within our system, because it really has revealed and shone a spotlight onto our underlying social crisis that we sit upon. So the fact that the top 0.7% of humanity own 49% of all of the world's economic wealth, leaving the bottom 71% of humanity to share just 2.7% of the world's economic wealth. So there's a huge disparity in the world that we live in. COVID-19 has also sparked, we can see potentially looming economic crisis. Many people say that we're likely to experience the largest recession in a century, We know that here on a local scale, unemployment is soaring and public debt is also skyrocketing. So $200 billion alone of public money are going into economic stimulus here in Australia. Another unforeseen impact of COVID-19 is also there may well be further crises down the track. It's been seen at one point that 265 million people could be pushed into acute food insecurity because they live so borderline anyway, and as a result of these destabilizing influences that are going on at the moment. And even just to depress you maybe a little stage further, perhaps we can even say that we might be on the brink of a potential political crisis that may emerge as we go forward. However, hopefully to pull you from what is potentially a fairly depressing news story, once we kind of overlay some of the things that are going on at the moment, we really do see that potentially we should never let a crisis go to waste, which is one of my favourite quotes. Let's see that there's actually a huge amount of opportunity within this time. So that's really what I want to be able to show, a kind of a brighter message of where we sit right now. We've kind of emerged from a period historically of this conservation, and like I said, this unprecedented era of human impact and destruction on the planet, which is quite possibly where we sit now, which is where we are emerging in this crisis area, where we could very well choose how we change and choose our path out of it, and what that could look like. So that could be regenerative, and I'll define those terms, but by here I mean creating a new birth, a new way of thinking of things, and having a perspective on life that's related and that creates unity. We could perhaps choose a sustainable path, and here in this presentation I'll argue that sustainability is absolutely not enough. That's the word that has probably got us into trouble in the first place. It hasn't really meant to define a huge amount, and in many ways, if you're to say something was sustainable, you're purely maintaining the status quo. This is absolutely not what we want and need right now. Or perhaps we could continue on what is a degenerative path. So it's where we are at the moment as well. We've got fragmented thinking, we haven't really joined things up, and we're acting purely in isolation. So instead, I'm choosing and hoping and calling for that we opt for a regenerative path. And what do I mean by that? So kind of leaning towards a regenerative definition. I like to use a few good quotes, as you'll see throughout this presentation, but one definition is that most people understand that to give a man a fish, you can feed him for a day. You can teach a man to fish, you can feed him for a lifetime. But fundamentally, where regeneration lies is that we need to encourage the man to love the ocean, to ensure that both the man and the ocean will thrive. So fundamentally, what regeneration is about is that we forgot to love the ocean as man. As men, we've gone about in a very much a human destruction kind of way. And the way that we've done that is that we've tried to apply a very technical view onto our surroundings. So as an example here, we've got stormwater channels. So man in our wisdom chooses to try and manage our waterways in a way that has very little impact or understanding of the way and the nature around it. Whereas nature, in much more wise words and seeing things, wants to try and understand and utilize water to our benefit, where we can have a very natural flood defense, but also create and provide conditions that are completely conducive to life. Are fundamentally some of the problems that have led us to where we are now is that we've had and tried to apply a very human and technological view of ourselves onto nature. Fundamentally, that doesn't work. And so what we actually need instead is that we need a fundamental shift in our perspective. And if we are to find ourselves into a regenerative path out of this, and we choose to have a much better impact on our way and have a flourishing surroundings, then we need to change our perspective to have one where we completely appreciate nature and we understand our role in nature and humans as well. We can design for co-evolution of the two. So what I'm going to be talking through is this fundamental shift in our perspective, where we need to think like nature. So there are quite a few concepts that we need to get our head around if true regenerative design is to be kind of pursued and fulfilled and really generally understood. So to think like nature, we need to understand nature. So we understand that nature is in fact, it's not simple, it's not one way, it's actually a highly complex web of interconnected species and energy flows. The impacts of which are felt at different scales and exist in different levels. So we need to find a way to understand all of the ways in which we can affect change and have impact at these different levels. We need to understand the context and the place of which we're situated in. The fact that if you place an indigenous species into a non-indigenous, a different area, it probably won't survive because it's not specific to that context or that place. We also, in the way that nature has a positive impact on our surrounding, we need to seek to have the same impact, and we can design for net positive in the same kind of way. And another principle of regenerative design is that we must design for evolution and ongoing development of our systems. I'll explain that in a bit more detail as well. But just to take some of the first concepts of regenerative design, is that we exist within systems. So taking us back to probably very junior years in biology classes and trying to understand the web of life, it's very much kind of where we need to get back to, is that everything in our worlds is related, and the fact that essentially as humans, whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. And so we can understand that both in forms of larger systems, but also in terms of projects and understanding. You can understand that a site actually exists within a neighbourhood, which may or may not have an impact on the life shared. And us as ourselves, as humans, we exist within groups, we exist within communities. And essentially for that, we need to broaden and reduce our scales of thinking. So as building sustainability practitioners, we tend to think of just the architecture of a building, so somewhere just in the kind of left middle there. So that's our kind of key focus, and we think about that. We haven't actually got particularly good as an industry at really understanding the things that go into the building. So going right the way down from product design into the chemistry, and that's where some of the work has been done recently. Touch on the Living Building Challenge and the red list, but really breaking down kind of the impact of the materials and the chemicals that go into the materials that can have an impact on product, have an impact on architecture. And then thinking more broadly as well, the fact that architecture has a huge role to play within community design. So for the example of having a good school can have quite a significant impact on a community. So for example, it may well drive house prices to increase if there is a good school within the area. So, and the community design plays a role in the local ecology, and in turn has a role to play within urban planning, and so on and so forth. So that we need to understand, therefore, that these much larger and smaller scales that we exist within. And so what we need to do then is we need to understand, so I've talked therefore about the concept of systems thinking, and then being able to understand thinking in systems, so much more complicated webs of understanding, and then being able to understand that and apply it to the place. So my background picture there is, I love, it's kind of an image of how beautiful and how diverse the different watersheds are within this country, and actually how therefore different it leads to each of those places and each of those contexts as a result. So what regenerative development really seeks to do, therefore, is really seeks to understand each of those contexts and place, so by applying these different scales of thinking. So understanding the environmental, for example, the hydrology that I just talked about, but also understanding how the place is in terms of social. What are the societies like that are in the local area? What are the economic principles of the local area? What's the political overlay and the governance and the ethics of the local environment? What are the cultural norms for the area? and also what the spiritual implications are, some of the ethics of the local region as well. So one of the key principles I'd like to talk to you about tonight, and I'll apply it slightly later on, is using these systems and more complicated ways of looking at buildings in order to understand and design for each unique place. One other element of regenerative design that I absolutely love is just seeking to be net positive, is that we can start to see buildings no longer as just buildings, but like we say, acupuncture points within a community to have a really positive impact. So, and we're talking about positivity in a way that can restore ecology, it can promote biodiversity, it can promote health, but it can also be an education point. It can promote culturally and socially rich society, and even many ways providing economic return. So those are some of the key principles that I'd like to pick up on, and by no means they're all principles of regenerative design. It's a very big concept, but I'd like to pick up on those. I'd like to just show you how that they can be applied. So the tools that we can use for regeneration, again, it's some very big topics that can be utilised. How we normally sit and understood our built environment so far is that National Construction Code in many ways could be seen as one of these degenerating forces, in the sense of, we're just sitting one above breaking the law. So, we're not really focusing on providing any net benefit if we are just complying with National Construction Code. We have we've got very much better at designing for green and high performance buildings, and really pushing now forward into sustainable design, and our tools have come into play and are now kind of pushing us over. So we've had Green Star and WELL, of which I'd actually now argue have elements to regenerative design. We understand what designing for net zero looks like. But mainly, if we really want to be getting into this regenerative concept, where we have a net positive impact on the atmosphere, on an environment, as opposed to less bad, then we need to be employing things like the Living Building Challenge. And I'll also be talking about the concepts of the Regenesis Institute. So the Living Building Challenge, this is by far still the most rigorous environmental assessment standard on the market. It looks at the key concept of what I kind of wanted to talk to us tonight, is that nature is absolutely kind of fundamental to the design. So you can see that even in the way in which the standard and the challenge presents itself, that there are 7 key categories across place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, beauty. And all of those really do have this key focus on balancing both ecological health, i.e. having extensive biophilia that's absolutely central to the design as well, alongside human health, i.e. having designing for making sure that we've got excellent indoor environmental quality. And I'd say that it aims to be truly regenerative, in the sense that have a net positive impact on, for example, in energy and water categories, and it's very much centred around place and site specific, so being able to understand exactly the context in which you're designing for. However, I do like to pick up that there's some other tools that can help us in terms of understanding how to flourish within human health in particular. And I picked up on the Well Building Standard as one of them. So for those people that aren't familiar with the Well Building Standard, there are 10 key concept areas that exist within it, including providing for excellent indoor air quality by providing additional ventilation and also high levels of filtration, excellent levels of water quality. Actually, many projects, some of the projects that we've worked on have actually failed their water quality tests. So providing excellent quality of water, providing lots of healthy, nourishing food to a site, allowing for people to be in touch with their circadian rhythm through the light concept, be designing movement into a building. They do say that sitting is the new smoking, and I'm pretty sure at least 99% of us that are on the school are still sitting and have been doing for most of the day. So the Well building standard tries to encourage movement within our daily life. It tries to design for indoor thermal comfort, because that can have a significant impact on our cognitive performance. To design, also wants to design away distracting sound, because that again can have a significant impact on how quickly we can get back to thorough working. Wellbeing design looks for the materials that we can apply, the mind category and the community categories, so recognising that community is essential to well-beings. The reason that I argue that this is helping assist us along into the regenerative pathway is that the Wellbeing Standard really does recognise, once again, the role of biophilia. So that is, just to recap, that's our innate connection to want to be with nature. So the fact that we have evolved as human beings, and 99.9% of our time as human beings, we've been evolved to be outdoor humans. And now, over the last, again, 100 years, we've evolved to be completely indoor beings, and that has a fundamental impact on our human health. So the Wellbeing Standard, in my eyes, has places biophilia as central to human health, because within each of these concept areas, there are preconditions, and of which there are things that we absolutely have to achieve, and optimizations are the things that we need to achieve to get a high score, for example, a gold or a platinum. So within our mind category, access to nature is a minimum precondition and must be provided for all buildings that need to be healthy. Another tool that is pushing towards regeneration and regenerative design with the consideration of human health and nature is, I'm excited to see where the future of Green Star is going. So Green Star is within a consultation period at the moment, and has released its draft credits, of which, again, as you can see, the nature credits take a fairly strong centre stage alongside places credits, so really understanding the place and making sure we're designing that for the people, so making sure that the people are healthy and happy, and also have a net positive impact on the future as well. So there are many elements, not necessarily all, but quite a few elements of where Green Star is going as well that pick up these elements of regeneration. But going back to this slide that I put up previously, it would be remiss of me to not pick up what we've got on the far right-hand side here, which is the work of the Regenesis group. And Regenesis were kind of some of the key early people that have been pushing this for at least, I think they say 30 years within the space before it was before it was cool. And what they argue is that these are tools, and that's absolutely completely fair enough. These are only tools, and the tools only go so far. So we know we're pretty smart. We've got the capacity to understand how to create buildings and communities and precincts that are healthy and they're resilient and they're carbon neutral. So all of the things that we want for human health and nature flourishing, but tools can only go so far. And in the same way that a bad workman blames his tools, all we've got is our tools. We need to become better workmen. And so the work of the Regenesis group is that in order to apply these, we have to be working on ourselves as well. So what that really means is also we need to be not only utilising these tools, but we need to be doing it in such a way that's very conscious and way of applying that for the maximum possible output. So I'm by no means going to say that I'm perfect at this, but what the work of the Regenesis group really kind of inspires in me is to bring along a bit of a personal path to being net positive, and again bringing up this word of having a net positive impact on the world around us. So my kind of aim and ambition to be a net positive practitioner, and that to me looks like utilising, for example, you would have seen in the previous slide that Green Star is using a positive category, and I really like, and was affiliated to that word. So seeking out projects that have a positive social, cultural and economic impact, but also ones that have a positive design for healthy humans and a healthy planet. but to not overlook that, okay, fine, that's what I can do at a kind of at a buildings level and as part of my job, but not to forget what can be done at an individual action level. So that's kind of carbon footprint reduction, getting your own house in order by sourcing green power, by sorting out your own finance, investing in an ethical super fund as an example, and doing a carbon audit on your life to try and work out ways in which you could be the most efficient that you can be. And also not to devalue the experience of wellbeing, and putting a firm emphasis that in order to go out and practice how to talk about having a healthy environment for both humans and the planet, that it needs to come from pouring from a full cup. So having and not being ashamed to put focus onto being a healthy practitioner as well. And then taking that down to right the way down into my own mindset. So trying to apply a positive mindset to every situation, and every situation that you can educate others as well. So I've talked therefore a little bit about the concepts of regenerative design and the tools in which we can use to apply it. And they apply for both building level and a little bit to do with personal level. And I just want to talk through a case study that we're working on at the moment. This case study is situated right in the middle of the CBD. So here within Melbourne Central, quite literally Melbourne Central is a very busy and bustling CBD retail shop. And we're seeking to put on two levels of extension, one on top of the retail, so 2 levels of retail on top of the existing retail centre, and also to design an 11-storey office made out of cross-laminated timber. So that's the actual physical work that we're seeking to do. The concept there is, and a lot of pre-work has gone into really wanting this case study on this area to provide an urban respite for visitors and workers. So there's a large focus as well on the greenery of Melbourne Central. So on our rooftop area, we're putting in indigenous planting and having a large area for food production. But what I like about this concept is going back again to applying the principles of regenerative design. And I'm not going to say that we've necessarily fully completed all of them. It's still, some of them are still in design phase, and actually in many ways you can't certify a project for being regenerative or not, because until into the future, it's very much up to history to judge whether a project was regenerative in the sense of it still enabled both this human flourishing and nature flourishing. But what we're doing instead is trying to understand exactly the ways in which we can apply some systems thinking to make this a regenerative development. And that's by working through some of those systems that I talked about earlier. So some of looking at the environmental systems and overlays, some of the social systems that are going on within the CBD, some of the economic underlying factors, political, cultural, and spiritual as well. So to talk through some of those, the environmental ones have really taken quite a centre stage. This is an idea that I love the concept of, and there's a village green that's going to be up on our level 4 that's designed to tell the history of the Yarra and the River Yarra by including a stream that will go through the middle of this village green area and into the building. Now this for me is quite a clear example of kind of a regeneration of and reflecting some of its previous landscapes, but also really quite meaningful to the Indigenous history of the area. So kind of remembering where in which we've come from. This is then also kind of further reflected in our areas that we've dedicated to native planting, and there's quite an extensive area plus an educational walk that will exist. So it's not only areas that will feature quite a lot of these species, but also educate people as well into basically the importance and the biodiversity that will bring as a result. So some of the concepts that we're hoping to bring in as part of that is that we're looking at including native trees, native shrubs, and also native edibles as well. So that to me has that biodiversity element to it, but also has an element of human planning for human flourishing as well. And then to carry that through even further, so kind of extending that environmental philosophy and applying that to the rest of the building and the rest of the design as well. So we're using cross-laminated timber, which hopefully we're hoping to be the largest cross-laminated timber building in the CBD, which definitely comes with its own challenges, and it's currently going through the building approval board at the moment. If it does come out to the other side, what it's shown to us by doing some really interesting life cycle analyses is that what a remarkable material that cross-laminated timber is acting as a carbon sink, and having that kind of negative environmental impact to start with, the fact that it can take carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in timber buildings that are sustainably sourced and sustainably grown, and even with the transport emissions, we've taken that into account within our life cycle analysis. Even that has still resulted in a significantly reduced embodied impact of our building materials. So this environmental philosophy is picked up in the cross-laminated timber. We know that we can designing for a 6-hour green star building. We've got quite a lot of the whiz-bang technology that goes with it. Designing for a high NABERS rating and zero carbon certification. I will say that they're pending at the moment though. We're going through that time in the design at the moment. We've both got a gas design and a fully electric design at the moment. We're just pushing to make sure that we can get this zero carbon certification. But on top of that, we've also got highly efficient fixtures and features in solar, efficient facade, low temp, VAV to the office system as well. So if we do manage to get ahead and go through with it, it will be one of the very few zero carbon certified buildings I think that exist in the country at the moment. And just to recap, so to be zero carbon certified is through the International Living Future Institute, we need to do a calculation and a certification of offsetting all of our total carbon. And by all of our total carbon, I mean looking at the embodied carbon that goes into our design, which is produced from both the construction of our design, but also the materiality. And as I spoke about already, the materiality we've managed to reduce significantly because of cross-laminated timber. But we've also been looking at ways to offset our operational carbon emissions as well. So that's why we do a carbon analysis of our predicted emissions from energy, transport and waste. And so just to differentiate that, sometimes people, when they're talking about net zero, for example, the climate active certification just looks at the operational elements of a building and looks to quantify those carbon emissions and also offset those, reduce those as much as possible, but then fundamentally purchase carbon offsets to equal that carbon that has been produced. Whereas what we're seeking to do is fully obtain the zero carbon certification, and to do that, we have to meet certain benchmarks. So one benchmark is 88 kilowatt hours a meter squared for energy efficiency. We're currently sitting at 64 kilowatt hours a meter squared, so we're well within that. We're currently going for a no fossil fuel design, so that's hopefully where we're going to need to get to and have a 100% all electric design. We've well and truly met the embodied carbon requirement. Again, this impact of cross-laminated timber, and the fourth requirement of zero carbon certification is that we provide additionality to the grid in terms of renewables. And so we're seeking to do that by adding 70 kilowatts of PV on top of our rooftop, and also source our power through a power purchase agreement of 100% green power. So they kind of summarize some of the environmental lens that we're seeking to apply kind of a regenerative framework to Melbourne Central. taking that forward into another few lenses, so the social elements of it, and one element in particular is designing the human health, as I talked about previously. So picking up that cross-laminated timber is inherently a very biophilic material. People love timber, they love being around it. There is lots of well-being benefits essentially from being with surrounded by something that's patterned and with that kind of texture to it. So we're hoping CLT will provide a large element of well-being to the people that will be inside the office portion of this building. We're also, as I previously discussed, but the rooftop area will be providing a lot of nature because it wants to be this urban respite within the middle of Melbourne CBD. And that too will provide this nature connection to people, which then I can give you lots and lots of stats on how, you know, for example, we work 8 to 12% better when we've got a view of nature or in contact with nature in some shape or form. So the fact that this nature will provide an excellent connection to the people and the workers within the building. It will also provide fresh and nourishing food to the office workers from what we're growing on the top there. We're also, in terms of social, we're designing for community gathering and connection. That is really a huge element to what we'd like to achieve as part of this rooftop space. And we're also designing in areas for human health to thrive, so that we'll have wellness spaces with on-site yoga and potentially a gym, and also wellness cafes as well. So within our social elements to it, but also picking up spiritual, cultural and political, a lot of work has been done and is being done by GPT on designing essentially for placemaking and for co-evolution as this goes forward. So a lot of work was done before the project even started to understand the local community, the ways in which they want to use the site, what they might be missing. And then there's a lot going on at the moment in terms of a social impact valuation, so the ways in which we can design to improve social interactions within the space and have the maximum amount of social impact. But also I've left up there spirituality, and one thing that I absolutely love about this project is that I sat in a spirituality and culture workshop not too long ago where members of the design team sat around and we discussed who this building was, what did it want to be, what did it want to symbolise, and therefore kind of how it wanted to co-evolve going forward. And really kind of some of the key things that came out of it is how we were going to get people to really want to be in the space and in a fair and equitable way. So we're hoping to design in areas where local charities or local groups can use it, and really start to create a kind of a buzz due to it being kind of this strong cultural aspect to it as well. So the reason I included therefore Melbourne Central is that in my eyes, and what I argue is that, you know, hopefully smart enough to design for kind of technically human health. We know what that looks like. We've got the Well Building Standard, we've got other tools that can help us really push for that. And we can also, you know, we're smart enough as well to understand what, how to design for really excellent environmental outcomes. What I would argue further though is that by applying a bit of a regenerative lens on it, by really shifting through all of the other ways in which this building can be an acupuncture point within the Melbourne Central community, sort of the social impacts of the cultural overlays, that we can really start to have, I guess, what's going to be a regenerative building into the future. So I've gone through quite a lot, but what I'd really like to kind of summarise by saying is that I've hopefully taken you through a bit of a journey, that where we're at the moment is a little bit of a potentially crisis point, in the sense of we have an opportunity that sits before us in a way that have an opportunity to rethink current systems and move towards these regenerative principles. But in order to do that, we need to have fundamental shifts in our thinking. I really do argue that sustainability does not go far enough, and that we now have a net positive understanding. And net positive should be the minimum, and regenerative should be the target. So I think now that sustainability has got us so far, and it's good, it's progressed us in certain ways, but never provided the concrete framework, because of even the term itself, sustainable, was probably a bit misleading. I hope we would have covered the fact that there are tools in existence that really do help guide us to help get to this framework for net positivity and regeneration. There are tools that can be applied to projects, for example, the Living Building Challenge, but to pick up on the work of Regenesis, they are just tools, and we do need to be conscious of all of the other ways in which we as humans can apply them, and really try and bring to ourselves the best possible weapon that we can be in applying those tools. And that really does start with us in each and every day. So that is the end of my presentation. I very much hope that you heard that. And I'm hoping to open the floor for Q&A.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Sophie. That was absolutely brilliant insight. And the case study as well is just phenomenal. Seeing how this is actually starting to be applied out there, not just, to one-off projects, but, to large precinct scale developments. It's just absolutely brilliant. So we've got some questions coming in now, and we're just gonna talk to you with them, Sophie. Hopefully, be able to give us a great insight into them. So one of the our first question off the bat is looking at the experience with stakeholders on Melbourne Central. How did they perceive the project and the journey that that Melbourne Central was going on?
So the stakeholders. So that was
correct.
So the stakeholders have been wide-ranging, and it depends who we define, I think, as our stakeholders. We've at certain times defined, all of the early adopters that live within Melbourne Central town as the stakeholders. We've applied them right the way down to the project team and everything in the middle. So I guess all of those stakeholders in our local area. I think working with the project team, I think what's been really interesting is that I think the journey that we've been on, I guess, is the design team, and that even over the course of this project, the goals have changed, and I think everybody has been open to that. So when we first started, like I did allude to, gas was in the design, and I think over the last 18 months since we've been on this project, we really have kind of kicked up our perspective that there really should be no gas. We can see that as part of our almost day-to-day design of buildings now, that they should be designed without fossil fuels in order to electrify them and make sure that they run off solely, like solar, for example. So I think to get back to the question of stakeholders, I think they've been very open to different parts of it, understanding different points, and GPT themselves actually have been very, very open in terms of understanding exactly the ways in which they can have the biggest impact. And I'd say that I kind of would take that opportunity to thank GPT for really opening up their minds to really pushing for example, a social impact survey, to be undertaking placemaking at the moment, and being kind of fully engaged and wanting to keep pushing this to be as kind of to keep growing, I guess, in more sustainability as each stage continues.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for that insight, Sophie. And just to tack on to that, I've got two questions that I'm going to deliver deliver one after the other. So the first, as they tie into each other, the first question is from Valerie, where Valerie's asking, was the client on board towards the regenerative approach at the start of the journey? At the start of the project, or did you need to convince them what were their aspirations at the beginning? And the second question I have is from Caroline, to follow up and tack into that, is what is the best way to bring clients along on this exciting journey?
Both great questions. Thank you, guys. So to take Valerie's one, I would say that GT's aim was always to have a very environmental building, and actually working out what that looked like and the ways in which. So I think, I guess we got very lucky in terms of the client, and had some, certain design team members in particular that really understood that in order to have a building that flourishes, the co-evolution of both of these things. So I think, like I said, we were lucky. I will put our hand up and say we didn't start necessarily where we've ended up. So I'd say that as a design team and as me, myself, we've designed, we've all evolved as that going forward. So yeah, I think that's kind of where we sat with the client. And they've been very open the whole way through. And I've actually gone out even further at certain points to go out and kind of actually let's find some more ways in which we can have a social impact and have this spirituality workshop that we had and be designing for this placemaking concept that we're kind of working at the moment to get in. So so yeah, not all clients are like that, but I would like to think therefore that I can take my lessons learned and apply it to Caroline's question of the best way to bring clients along on this exciting journey. I really think just being able to demonstrate the ways in which different types of value can be demonstrated. I've always been a person of sustainability, that we have to demonstrate value, and again, this is my personal journey, but I always thought that people wanted to hear that in terms of economic return. For me now, taking the time, yes, I can try and plan out some economic return on investment, as I'm sure many sustainability professionals would love to do, but really trying to understand what's the maximum highest potential. And I didn't talk too much about this word potential, but really trying to envisage what that looked like and trying to communicate that as clearly as possible to clients. So taking them on the journey means hopefully engaging them, painting a very exciting picture. I think where we can start to try and describe where these things are both co-evolving and kind of working at their best potential. Taking them on the journey, really. I think really for me, it's like I don't have all the answers. It's putting my hand up to say, that's the person I need to bring to myself, and that as a team, we have to get them to buy into that concept that, we're on a journey together, and actually the answers will co-evolve. It's definitely a consultant rash that I've got, that I want to have all the answers immediately, but getting that ego out of the way and being able to say, I don't know, and let's work it out together.
Well said. I definitely like the terminology you used in that answer. Thank you for that insight. And just to loop back to well now, we've got a question from Paul, and Paul is asking that, is it possible to apply the well building standard to residential design and construction?
It is. Yes, absolutely, yes. So the way in which the well building standard has been designed at the moment, so it was first introduced in 2014, it was well version 1, it was very office specific, so because in many ways a lot of us, and again, maybe pre-COVID, but spent a lot of our time in the office environment, so really recognising that actually has a huge amount of, because we have less agency and we're very much put in one place, and actually that environment can kind of have a day-to-day impact on us. However, in 2018, the Well Building Standard and the International Well Building Institute brought out Well version 2. Well version 2 was a lot more flexible. It wanted to incorporate all types of buildings, so we can now be applied to multi-unit residential, to hospitals, to education. Education, for example, alone presents such an amazing opportunity to design buildings for human flourishing and therefore much better cognitive performance and of kids to thrive within them. So as part of that, we can now apply the well building standard a lot more flexibly. So it has can be applied, and I've undertaken a few pre-assessments to multi-unit residential, absolutely. Where, for example, you have big buildings, but actually not in an official way, but in an unofficial way, I have kind of used the tool to apply the principles to more singular houses as well. So taking the tools of, so you won't be able to necessarily get a full certification applied to a single house, but you can definitely use the principles, so principles of excellent air quality, water quality, nourishment, sound, etc., etc. So all of those have been analysed by the International Wellbeing Institute of how they apply to a residential component.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Sophie. And just speaking to that, while we're talking about, the residential small scale. So a question for Talina is asking, do you think this regenerative approach can apply to all small scale, all scales of projects, i.e. small scale residential alterations and additions projects?
An excellent question, and I would argue it'd be absolutely yes. And so the ways in which that can be done is definitely needed. So again, to rechange, what I'm arguing for is that we need to change the way in which we think. And so we need to be thinking, for example, in even smaller extension is that, what would be the highest potential of this? How could we have a way in which that we have our best performance in terms of both nature thriving and humans thriving. So, and there are ways in which that can be done in small areas, I would argue.
Absolutely. And speaking that on the topic of regen, so an interesting question from Claire. Claire is asking, Claire is stating, I'm interested in to know how to develop the regenerative concept for a broader audience bigger than the built environment. So concepts around regenerative leadership, regenerative storytelling, that could go more mainstream. Are there any thoughts or opinions around how we can use looking at regen and the concepts of it, to look at our leaderships and our storytelling using that systems thinking approach?
Well, there's lots of elements of regeneration design, and again, I'd probably go back to starting with self, absolutely. So, and that kind of being the mindset element to it. So, what is the best kind of person I can be in that single moment? So, the mindset and the positivity element to it, I think as well. So, and then applying that on leadership scales, I think being a regenerative leader and thinking in systems is, I'm not going to lie, I think it's an interesting challenge. It implies what I think a regenerative leader needs to look like is that they need to be, again, throw ego out the window. You need to just know how to understand and talk to all of the people that it most applies to, so all of the people that you're trying to lead. And what it really requires of you is that you need to just be an unbelievable listener and an unbelievable facilitator that really that allows and gives space to each of the systems or each of the concepts or even each of the opinions that come up, and being able to what true regenerative leadership will be is that you kind of bring those all together and kind of be able to shift through them in a way that you can find the way that really again has this best benefit for both the nature and humans.
Thanks, Steph. I like I liked how you visualized that for us. It was really quite effective.
There needs to be more courses on regenerative leadership. I think that's a fascinating topic. It's a great question, and there's a lot to do with what I would argue that regenesis approach, which is how we turn up and bring our best selves in that, and how we deal with people, how we can be good people, and interact with each other.
Absolutely. And touching on that, when you're talking about people, this is a question from Tony. So Tony is asking that, given we are including traditional ownership concepts in the frameworks and designs, which is great, what is the feedback from traditional owners and how would they like to proceed if they had the reins on a project like the case study in Melbourne?
It's an absolutely another excellent question, and I think I don't have a single piece of individual feedback to give you, but I know that from having explored the space, I do think that the way in which we engage in our Indigenous community, I think, you know, has to be done in a very sensitive way, and it has to be done in a way that benefits the people that we're talking to, and it's not, you know, what we can get out of our project. I would like to think that raising awareness and using it as a tool in order to raise awareness, I think I would like to think that they would be positively engaged on, especially in the way in which we're hoping to bring design and building to really reflect what was and the kind of the ethics and the culture and the values of not only what the era potentially looked like and bringing back the stream, but definitely bringing back all of the species that used to be there and the biodiversity, which people kind of, yeah, it's the absolutely devastating fact about how much we lost. So I'd like to think that you know, it would have a very positive influence, but it has to be done in a way that is very sensitively done, in a way that benefits the people that we're speaking with as much as it benefits the project.
Thanks for that, Sophie. There's I think for our question where there's a lot to unpack, I think you respond to that fantastically. Thank you for that. And switching back now to, I suppose, more specifically to Melbourne Central and the projects where you're delivering this type of work on. A question from Fiona is looking at involving tenants. So Fiona asked, like, how are you involving tenants, or are you involving tenants in this process?
The tenants are, I guess, probably about, I think, 60% known at this time. I'd actually say, so that's of the office building, and I think there's a lot that's being done in terms of what needs to be done in the office building, in terms of designing, making sure that people engage in both the human and planetary outcomes of the office building. But what's really been interesting is that the tenants and the proposed tenants of the retail space have very much changed over the course as we've changed, as the design of this has changed as well. So if I'm honest, when the design started out, it was retail, and how that now has evolved to be much more community areas. So we're actually now designing for co-office, you know, an office instead, potentially on one of those levels of retail, and the tenancies that are likely to go in there kind of sustainably managed and community focused. So there's very much been a transition, not only I think in engaging tenants, they've been slightly down the track, but even who we want to get in and what we're designing for, even that has changed. So yes, but as we go in and we do engage the tenants even more, there's absolutely going to be fundamental to engaging those as well. And some of the key principles, and we are picking up on some of the tools we'll be doing, engaging as many of them as we possibly can. One of the principles of the well building standards is we do a pre-occupancy survey and a post-occupancy survey. All of those kind of tools we'll be using to help us engage as well and inform.
Absolutely, I wholeheartedly agree with that. We definitely should be engaging and looking at post-occupancy surveys in our buildings more and more to understand what we're designing is effective. Thanks for that, Sophie. And back to one where we're going to talk about dollars for a second. So Renee is asking the question about, or looking at, economic return seems to be the bottom line in changing the mindsets of developers and real estate agents. It is important but very narrow focused. You mentioned the National Construction Standards as limiting conditions. How do we go about changing them?
So the National Construction Standard has already made a significant leap forward in terms of energy efficiency in NCC 2019. It has, since its first few iterations back, really now achieved significant energy efficiency aims, and to some extent now obviously human aims in terms of thermal comfort. So tying that into, but that is still our minimum baseline, and we potentially have more scope again. But our NCC 2022 would be the next update. It's a really tricky one, but that race to the bottom is incredibly hard to avoid. And so this is where, again, trying to become as best as we possibly can, a good practitioner of sustainability and applying that net positive goal, not only to these big shiny ones like, we're fortunate enough to work on London Central, but actually applying just a positive goal to most of the projects that I work on. So try and pull them up from that baseline minimum, being able to demonstrate some more value and some more both human and planetary goals. And I'll actually go so far as say I find personally the well-building standard is a tool that I find quite easy not to sell but to use in many ways, because people get it. People understand that we spend so much time indoors. It's 90% of our time indoors. That's 78 years of our life over an 82-year lifespan. It's huge, and we all know that being next to nature makes us feel good at the end of the day. So and the concepts of being able to sell something better than a baseline minimum, I found have become much easier with these tools, and especially I'll say with the well-building standard, the research that's gone behind it, and that can send through just volumes of data that has been found. And they did 7 years worth of research before launching the well-building standard. There's so much information that sits behind the science behind it. So the knowledge is there, and the tools are there. It's now pretty just up to us to be able to communicate those, and being a good communicator to get us past just a horrible minimum.
That's exactly right. And just to tack onto what Sophie said there, for anybody out there who are engineers or architects, or even just yourself as a passionate sustainability advocate, you can get involved in the National Construction Standard when they have their open feedback sessions. And so that's an important thing, to get in there and to review our standards and provide feedback to get those standards from the degenerative scale moving up to the regenerative scale. So looking at pushing our minimum construction codes further up towards that regenerative scale. So as the basis, as the minimum we're designing to, is towards regenerative design. I think that's a fundamental thing that an individual can push with the construction codes. And I'm just going to read. We've got three. I'm just going to wrap up now, as I'm conscious of time. So we've got three. Rather than questions, more just interesting comments that we've got here. I'm going to read out, and then Kerry's going to deliver one of our last questions. So we've got Rene's asking. Rene's saying, I like the concept and the shown examples of regenerative design. Yet holistic design is not a new idea. I see great parallels with ecological design principles. And so thanks for that comment, Rene. That's we are looking at. So yeah, that's a really informed comment, looking at the parallels of what we're talking about, and looking at the principles of holistic design, and that's what regenerative design is looking at, encompassing. Then we have David, and David's asking, David's talking about it would be good to get these principles involved in public housing and inspire people. And exactly what Sophie's touching on today is exactly about mental about bolstering our health as well as sustainability, bolstering our health as well as the sustainability, the health of our sustainable environment. And then lastly, David P, is now has a comment rather than a question. He's saying he's read a book about Charles Massey recently, called The Reed Warbler, A New Agriculture, A New Earth, which looks at primarily at regenerative agriculture, but touches on changing the person as well as being at the heart of any change. I think that's a fantastic, fantastic statement there, Dave. Thank you for sharing that with us as well. And then lastly, we're going to have Kerry. Kerry's got a question she wants to.
Yes. So I'm a human geographer, so I found this presentation fantastic. Like, my brain was just firing in so many different directions, because as a human geographer working with sustainability in the built environment, this is what I do and think about every day. So it was fantastic to hear from you, Sophie. Thank you so much. And as a co-convener, I never get to ask questions. So I'm taking this time to ask a question. I hope everyone is okay with that. I understand that there are very, very few buildings and precincts that have been developed to these standards to date. So I'm really interested, I'm also an urban planner, so I'm really interested in who is driving the push for these buildings and these precincts that are designed to something like a well building or a green building standard. Is it coming from council? is it being championed by architects or planners, or is it coming from the larger developers like GPT or Stocklands or something like that? And it's kind of a 2-point question, I guess. So related, who's championing it, but thinking about who's championing it, I'm also interested in what are the barriers to more builders, construction, architects, whatever, taking up and championing these regenerative principles and accreditation. So pretty much I'm bouncing off something I think that Raina asked was, how do we make this standard? So who's championing it currently, and how can we get this, everyone to come on board and make this the standard, I guess is what I'm asking.
Okay, so who's championing it currently? So yes, you're absolutely right. There aren't that many people that have actually kind of come through the other side. So we've got the Burwood Brickworks, which was by Frasers, and I would say they did an excellent job of championing that themselves. So the big developers, and again, my experience as well as that GPT as a big organisation were the people that with both the vision and also some capacity to understand what, I guess, in many ways the next big thing was, and really kind of go down this route of understanding regenerative design. So it's my experience that it is the big developers. I know of a lot of fantastic individuals that are working in the space as well that are having an impact, and it is, it can be down to a single person that can push this over the line. And so for those people that are doing it, I salute you. Do I think it's councils? Unfortunately, councils kind of have their hands tied at the moment. From what I see is that they really do spend, and I actually salute them, they spend a lot of time picking up that minimum baseline. So they're the people that are doing the work, that are pushing it from national construction minimum to implementing some level of actual sustainability. So that's where the council's role have lie. And I think, because we often as a sustainability professional get caught in the middle of a client that wants to do it as cheaply as possible, and council that want to maintain some kind of standard. And I really say it often, I'll say it again, I think councils do an excellent job at trying to maintain that, because otherwise the client will just push to reduce. So unfortunately, that's not the role of council at the moment. They're pushing the kind of green star. Maybe they'll go into well networks. It might be some time before we get to fully regenerative design, unfortunately. So yeah, so the people that are doing it are those. And sorry, Kerry, the second part was...
I was wondering, thinking about who's doing it now, how can we get everybody on board to make this the standard? If you could wave your magic wand and just kind of target and change one thing to make this the standard, what would you kind of target?
I would go after everybody that's on this call and further and beyond, and to, again, comes back to that principle of ourselves. So being able to hopefully try and understand the role of that. We need to fundamentally in our own personal lives understand that we need to think differently. What's got us to where we are now is not where we want to go. So how can we get everybody just to be thinking about, even in a micro scale, on a small thing every single day, if everybody had a net impact of just a little bit more positive, and positive, I mean in terms of net positive environmental impact, net positive human impact, that kind of just nudges their way just as small, like as quickly as we can. So my one thing is that everybody can go away, learn a little bit more about it, and try and implement just some elements to it. And I'm not saying, I put up the full web potentially of regenerative design, considering environmental, social, this, that, the other. It's not necessarily having to do absolutely all of one of those. There might just be key elements that you can pick out and seek to apply that can make a difference.
Well said, Sophie.
Yeah.
If that doesn't regenerate everybody, I don't know what will. That was very inspiring. That was very uplifting. Thanks for that, Sophie. And just going to end, we actually do have one more question. It would be amiss if we didn't speak to it. So this one is from Paul, and Paul is asking about, what are your thoughts on the Passivhaus standard and how it stacks up with the standards discussed tonight?
How regenerative stacks up against the standard?
What are your thoughts on the Passivhaus standard and how it stacks up with the standards discussed tonight? Passivhaus and how does it go with everything else?
Yes, so you're right. I included Passivhaus as one of the tools, and it absolutely has an excellent role to play in terms of really focusing us on both that human and health element as well. It's not one that I picked up too much, but in terms of energy efficiency that it's driving for, and in terms of, you know, that indoor environmental quality, to me it just really highlights we're so good at it. We know, like we do know, and that needs to be adapted on a much wider scale. But we are smart, you know, we're smart beings that we can design for it, and we can allow them both to survive. My kind of key element to it is that I'd like to add just this notion of biophilia and a lot more kind of just more focusing on nature. So Passivhaus has that technological element to it, but we need to apply it to how do we make, you know, the wider surrounding and the wider ecological value and the wider nature that will thrive off. Once we've got our technological solution, we need to make sure our ecological solution that's around us and making sure that thrives as well. So Passivhaus is absolutely part of the puzzle, but we need to think about how we change and we think about nature and we get that in more as well.
Absolutely, totally agree. Passivhaus has done fantastic. Passivhaus standards has done fantastic things to drive our building standards and to give us the science to understand what we're doing wrong in the construction industry and what we're doing wrong with designing our houses. And it's really driven that design in the residential sector. But you're right, like looking at the regen scale is, you know, encompassing that design, and then looking beyond that as well to our environment. Obviously, where Living Building Challenge and Regenesis kind of answers those questions. But yeah, so we don't have any more questions tonight, Kerry?
No, I think we're at time. So thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us tonight. Everyone who's watching, we can give a round of applause. I don't think it's weird to do that at this stage of the COVID situation. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Doug, for all your tech support in the background. That was fantastic. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you are interested and you've enjoyed this presentation and you would like to become a part of Renew, please do sign up. We're on Google at renew.org.au, I think. So check that out. Think about becoming a member, or alternatively get in contact with us and we can follow up. So I think that's it. We will say good night.
Yes.
Thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you everyone, and thank you, Sophie, and
yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.